What's going on, people? My name is Terrell Harris from theopenbox.com, where our vision is to make wholeness more accessible. Today, what I want to do is shoot a very short video on how we think about the resurrection of Jesus. So we're approaching Easter, or depending on when you watch this, it may be a little bit after Easter. And I just had this idea about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So we know the story for those of us who are Christians, and for those of us who may not be familiar with it. Jesus is believed to be resurrected after he was nailed to the cross and after he rested in the tomb for 3 days. So when we look at this story, some Christians or Christians take it literal to mean that Jesus was resurrected and actually went with God and was able to send the Holy Spirit back, and that Jesus lives in our lives. Some people believe Jesus is God in the flesh. Despite your beliefs, whether or not you subscribe to the Christian story or not, the actual resurrection of Christ, literally, I was actually thinking about the resurrection in more of a figurative sense. So one thing that I realized for me is, this Christian journey that we go through, it tends to be up and down. There's peaks and valleys. And what I often notice is that Christ has to be resurrected, or the idea of Christ has to be resurrected in our lives almost on a daily basis. So when I say that is, oftentimes, through our daily struggles or anything that we're going through, either we're going to turn our back on God or turn our back as it relates to the things that Christ, we can learn from Christ, or the things that Christ taught his disciples, or at times not only do we just turn our backs on Christ, but we really don't necessarily care to seek out the teachings of Christ. So like one of the things with me that I remember is when my grandmother was going through her struggles with Alzheimer's disease, like I scrapped religion completely, because from my perspective, especially since my grandmother was heavily involved in the church, why exactly would God allow her to receive Alzheimer's? So not necessarily to dive into that story, but that was a way in which I just wanted to give that example, but that was a way in which I kind of turned my back on God, and actually, Jesus had to be resurrected within my life again. So what happened, how Jesus was actually resurrected, people invited me to church, and then eventually, I found my way back. But the thing about this resurrection experience that is more a not necessarily literal, but like a figurative sense of actually Christ being resurrected in our lives, whether it's daily, monthly, weekly. For me, what happened was, things began to actually make sense. So as Christ was resurrected in my life, like I began to feel a little bit more peace with what happened to my grandmother. Actually, my grandmother passing away. So I just had this quick thought about us as Christians or followers of Christ, or those who are new to the faith. Maybe we should look to have a resurrection experience daily. Let's think about it. So on Sundays, depending on the preacher, depending on your church, you may hear about the resurrection of Christ. So some preachers actually lead things back to the cross, some don't. On Easter, there's this big emphasis of Christ being resurrected. Well, if we wake up on a daily basis and seek the rebirth or the regeneration or the resurrection of Christ in our lives on a daily basis, and reflect on some of the things that we've learned, reflect on the teachings in the Bible, and also reflect on how Christ moves in our lives, I think what will happen with us is then we'll have the energy, we'll have the spiritual vibrance, or the spiritual fortitude to push forward and actually be the hands and feet of Christ. So I think for us, we need not look to Easter all the time to have this resurrection experience. The actual resurrection experience should actually be sought on a daily basis. And if we seek Christ and the resurrection of Christ in our lives on a daily basis, I think that connection and that search or that journey on a daily basis will carry us to places that we can't even imagine. So let's say, for instance, let's take a look at Peter, and I'll end after this. So Peter denied Christ at the resurrection, or right before he got crucified, But then if you read the book of Acts, you see all of the things Peter was able to accomplish, through the Spirit. So like Peter had a resurrection experience that would allow him to do some of the things that Christ did. He raised people from the dead. He, preached and a whole bunch of people got saved. So there are actual examples of how Christ was resurrected in people's lives. Not necessarily in a literal sense where Christ is actually going to the grave and being, risen up and sitting with God, but how actually Christ shows himself to, in our lives. So that's just my quick thoughts. I had to dump about that because I know Easter's coming up. So peace and blessings. What I want you to do is follow me on social media at Mr. Terrell Harris. You can follow us on Twitter at The Open Box. Visit our website, theopenbox.com, and also follow my wife at Landa Brooke on Twitter. Peace and blessings. I hope all is well.